I want to thank everyone for joining us for our webinar today now that I've worked on my sound issues here. This is our latest webinar on continuing education series, The Path to P33, Strategies for Earning the APCO Agency Training Program Certification, or ATPC. My name is Lee Santel. I'm a radio communications specialist with the Rockland County Sheriff's Office here in the downstate or Hudson Valley portion of New York. There's my contact information up there on the screen. Email is usually the easiest way to get me. If you have questions, if there's something I can answer for you, please don't hesitate to drop me a line after the presentation is over. If you don't already follow us on Facebook, we do quite a bit of training, both in person and online. Our in-person training is obviously suspended right now due to coronavirus, but generally we do, and we announce them on Facebook first. So if you're not following us on Facebook, please hit us up at the Facebook handle 44 Control and follow us there. That's where we post all of our training first before it even goes out over email. Rockland County is the smallest county in New York State outside of the 5 boroughs of New York City, but we're pretty well populated. We have a population by last count about 330,000, and our semi-consolidated countywide PSAP is answering about 208,000 calls per year. 108,000 of those are 911, and the other 100,000 are 7-digit or administrative calls. So that's what we do in our neck of the woods. I just want to note before we get started that although I am on the national committee with APCO for Project 33, I am a member. I do participate in reviews, and I'm also on a couple of committees with the Atlantic chapter of APCO. I just want to say for the record, I don't represent APCO International or the Atlantic chapter of APCO in a formal capacity for this presentation. The information in this presentation is just some suggestions based on the experiences that our agency had when we sort of went through the process and got our P33 certification. And I'm hoping based on our mistakes or lessons, you can glean a little bit in helping you to get your P33 certification, whether you're thinking about applying for it in the future or whether you're already in the process of applying for it. But that being said, I don't officially speak for APCO, so if you have formal questions about whether something qualifies to meet the standard, or if you need permission to do something, or you need to ask about deadlines or exceptions, obviously please contact APCO directly. Contact the P33 committee at APCO. It's on the website, and ask them for their formal guidance. And yes, even though if you're watching this presentation later on down the line, and I know about half our attendees typically watch this as a recording later on, that's great, but sometimes the rules change, the APCO programs change, the standards change, so make sure you follow up with APCO for all the recent revisions and additions of the programs and regulations that they may change from time to time. It does happen every few years and so forth. Speaking of APCO, I am the chair of the membership committee for the APCO Atlantic chapter. Most of you, I'm guessing, who are watching this presentation found out about it because you saw it through PS Connect or one of the other contact methods that APCO Atlantic chapter uses. But if you're not a member of APCO International, remember when you join APCO International, you automatically become a member of your local chapter as well. And if you're in the northeastern portion of the United States, like I think all of us are, that would be the Atlantic chapter of APCO. Joining APCO is a really great choice. You get so many benefits: training, advocacy, networking, news and industry events, social events, conferences, both at the chapter level and the national level. All these great benefits that come along with being a member of APCO. It's very inexpensive. I think it only costs for your regular telecommunicator or personnel, it costs $7 or $8 a month. So if you're not a member, I hope you'll consider becoming a member. Visit www.apcointl.org/join to do that anytime online with your credit card, and thus end the commercial. Let's jump into it. We're going to talk about the goals and limitations of the APCO Agency Training Program Certification. ATPC is a great program. I'm a firm believer. It does have some limitations. There are some restrictions on who's allowed to apply for it and so forth. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll jump into some various strategies. Again, I can't guarantee they necessarily apply to your agency. Maybe you knew some of this information already. Maybe you didn't. If you're in the process of applying and you're maybe looking to avoid some pitfalls, you can kind of learn from our mistakes and lessons as we go. So I'll talk about that for the latter part of the presentation. And of course, if there's anything I don't cover or if you have questions, please don't hesitate to smash that Q&A button and type it in the box, and I'll try to answer them at the end. Or if it's something you want to take offline outside of the webinar, of course, don't hesitate to email me, or if you're watching this on a recording later on, don't hesitate to email me, and if it's, as long as it's something that's not, that I can offer an opinion on, I'll be glad to give you mine, or I'll direct you to the P33 committee over at APCO, one of the two. So if you're not already in the application process, or if you're not familiar, what is the Agency Training Program Certification, or ATPC? And basically, the ATPC is a certification that's offered by APCO of an agency's telecommunicator training program. It mostly focuses on new hire training, when somebody is first hired into your center and they get their initial sort of onboarding training. But there is some in there as well about continuing education for career employees who are already employed by your center. As you may know, maybe you don't, all the big projects that APCO does are numbered, that APCO International does have numbers going all the way back to Project 1 in whatever year it was, I think the 1940s, I can't remember. But all the way up to 1 through their most recent project, if I recall correctly, was Project 43. Originally when the ATPC program was developed, it was Project 33, and many people within and out of APCO, myself included, often refer to the ATPC as Project 33 or P33 because they're so used to hearing it. It's a little less wordy than ATPC, but it's the same thing. It's the same program. It's the certification of an agency's telecommunicator training program, of a PSAP's telecommunicator training program. Why would you want to get such a certification for your agency? What difference does it make? Well, first of all, it shows a commitment on the part of your agency that your agency takes the training of telecommunicators seriously and believes that that training should meet certain national standards. Now, I hope that you had a good experience when you first got hired for your first job as a public safety telecommunicator. Maybe you're still working at the same agency you were when you got started. I'm not. I worked for more than one agency. I hope you had a better experience with onboarding than I had. I got hired by a very busy but very small police department in the Hudson Valley, and the training primarily consisted of a police officer telling me, here's the desk, here's the phone, here's the radio. Don't bother the sergeant unless somebody's dying. No, dying, not dead. But that was pretty much it. They figured, just answer the phone, answer the radio, and that's the end of it. Getting the ATPC demonstrates to people in your agency and also to people outside your agency that your agency takes dispatcher training seriously, that it meets appropriate standards, that it's done the right way. And that's important both for the staff inside your agency, for the telecommunications staff inside your agency, and also for other agencies or the public looking in to know that your agency takes it seriously. And that goes to sort of the industry or national level as well. Getting the ATPC is a statement on the part of your agency that your agency believes at a national level or across our country that telecommunicators should be trained following a standard, that they receive important training, there are certain important things that they should know about and they should be skilled at and things like that. And that's good for your agency, that's good for your region or your chapter, and that's good for our industry nationwide as well, because the more agencies that get on board with this sort of thing, the better it is for the image and the progression of our job as we go on. So that's a very, very good thing in my opinion. That being said, the ATPC does not certify individuals. It is not like these other programs where it's like an individual education or certification and you get letters after your name. That's not what the ATPC is about. It's about your agency. It's your agency getting the certification. I mean, there are programs for individuals. Of course, the APCO program, the PST program, which is the entry-level training for telecommunicators, obviously very important in my opinion, or one of the other equivalent initial training programs like National Academy's BTC, Basic Telecommunicator, also, that's very good certification as well. And of course, if you want to do training, if you want to get yourself personally trained and certified in how to train others, there are CTO programs. APCO has one, and NINA has one. There are probably more that I'm not mentioning, but certainly you can get that for yourself. But the ATPC is for your agency. It's about your agency's treatment of training for dispatchers and your agency's commitment to training dispatchers in the right way, at least at a minimum foundation. So with that being said, if your agency decides that they're going to want to get the ATPC, the Project 33 certification, what are the requirements to get that certification? Well, the requirements for that certification are based on a document. It's a national standard published by APCO. As you may know, APCO is an officially qualified national standard setting agency by ANSI. So the APCO American National Standard, or ANS, has been published, and it talks about the minimum requirements for what you need in order for your agency to get the P33 certification. The ATPC process is the formal method of APCO verifying that you meet what's in the standard. And that standard is called the Minimum Training Standard for Public Safety Telecommunicators. It's revised every few years. The last revision, it was in 2015. It's version 3.103.2. Every few years, APCO gets their SDC, their Standards Development Committee together, and they revise it, which is good. And that's what it's based on. And if you do get that certification, if you do get the Project 33 certification, you know, there are some other nice benefits. If you go to the national conference for APCO every year, this year it'll hopefully be in Orlando this year. I know they're still planning to have it with some changes, but if not this year, then next year. Next year it'll be in San Antonio, Texas. If you do get the certification, you can go to the conference, and they have this lovely presentation ceremony with a luncheon. It's called the Food for Thought Luncheon, and many hundreds of people from the 911 industry are there, if not thousands. It's a big luncheon, and that's part of the conference. And they call you up on stage, and they give you a nice plaque and you get to take you get to take a nice photo, which is shown to all the attendees. You get to go on stage with Cheryl Greathouse and the others up there. And it's very nice, and they put your name on the board there, so that's always very nice. And they also they publish a press release on the APCO homepage, which you might have seen, where it says, you know, your agency has been certified, and it's all very nice. So all very nice things that you get if you get the certification. But of course, the primary goal of the certification is regarding the training, to make sure that the dispatchers are getting the training that they need and that they deserve. So that's a good thing. These pictures, I think, are from the 2018 conference. So. And there's Tompkins County, New York. I don't know if anybody from Tompkins is on, but hope you are. All right, for the ATPC, the application fee is $500. It's not refundable, so once the check's in the mail, it's gone, whether you get the certification or not. And the deadline for the final submit, so when you basically have all your materials together and you submit them to APCO as your your first submission, your package, that final submit, if you want to make it for recognition at the next year's conference, it's got to be in by December 1st. So at this point, it's too late for anyone to hit the 2020 conference if you haven't done your submission already. But if you were to go today and open an application today, or if your application is already open and you haven't done your final submit yet, you have to get your materials in for the first round by December 1st of 2020, this coming December 1st, and that will qualify you, if you get your certification, to be on stage, if you so desire, at the 2021 conference in San Antonio. If you wait until after December 1st, then it will be pushed off to 2021. I don't remember where they're holding it for 2021. I think Vegas or something. So that is the deadline for that. There's no on-site visit with this program. If you've been through other certification or accreditation programs like CALIA, or here in New York we have the New York State Sheriff's Association and some others, they require a site visit where someone actually comes to your agency and they check things out on site. They fly someone out, or maybe you have to fly to them, one of the two or both. APCO's Project 33 program doesn't require an on-site visit. You submit the materials, your documents, your other materials to APCO. They do it electronically through a website. And those materials, APCO calls them proofs. You submit the proofs online, and the materials get evaluated by a committee, the Project 33 committee. They assign teams to review your submissions and make sure that they're satisfied, that they meet the standards and so forth. And if they approve, if the people who are reviewing your application approve that you've submitted the appropriate documentation and everything looks good, then the committee grants you your certification. Those committee members are made up of APCO members from across the country. Some of them are line-level dispatchers. Some of them are administrators, directors, managers, industry folks. It's a wide-ranging array of people who are on that committee. I think there's about 75 people on that committee, if I'm not mistaken, this year. So it's a large committee, and they check it out. And then if everything checks out, then your agency gets the certification, and you get all the benefits that come along with it. So next, I want to talk about if you are getting ready to do if you've decided that your agency is going to go ahead and get the Project 33 certification, you want to pursue it for your agency. Great, that's a fantastic thing. There is a procedure from APCO on how to, the sort of requirements that you have to go through in order to process the application, to submit the application. I would like to expand on a little bit and talk about some of the things that I would recommend based on our agency's experience. It's a little more in-depth than APCO's minimum requirements. I would like to talk about some of the things that I would recommend if you haven't done them already. Some of them you may have done already if you're already in process, but bear with me. The first thing that I would recommend, and I really can't stress this enough, you have to download the standard and look at it. And I've been talking to a couple of agencies from around New York State who I've been in touch with since we got our P33 certification, and they've been picking my brain a little bit, which is great. But a few of them, not all of them, but a few of them, I was surprised to find that some of them have not even looked at the actual standard, or at least not in any great detail. They downloaded it, but then it just sort of went on a desk and nobody looked at it. I must recommend that you download the standard and you look at it. And you compare each element, they're within the standard, and I'll have the link to download the standard at the end of the presentation, but you can just go on the APCO website. It's under the standards menu. If you look at the standard, they have, each little part has a number to it, like 2.3.5 deals with a certain subject or something, and I refer to those as elements. So each element or each item within the standard, you're going to want to basically go down the list and compare where you're holding at your agency. Do you train on that now, or do you not train on that? Or, basically take stock of where you're holding, because I see that some agencies are applying for the certification, and they sort of do the application first, and then they go through the standard and they look at it, and they're like, wait a minute, we're missing 50 things, and now their back is up against the wall to get them all done for the application. So I would recommend, before you even formally commit to before you even open the application, before you pay your application fee, and before you start jumping through those hoops, first download the standard and look at it, and go through it element by element and check to see where you're holding in terms of your current status before you start the ball rolling. Now, when you look at those different elements of the standard, I think there's like 160 of them, or whatever the number is, I can't remember. When you look at each one, you're going to find probably that if you're like most agencies, if you're like us, I think, you're going to find that there's a wide variety of where you're holding your agency. You may find that your agency already meets the trainings for some, maybe even for a large portion of the elements that are in the standard. There's an element in the standard that says you have to train the trainees on how to use the phonetic alphabet. Okay, so maybe you do that already. And if that's the case, hey, that's less work for you to get in alignment with the standard. You're already doing it. That's fine. But it's a little more complicated than that. You might find that the training you're doing, possibility number two, you might find that the training you're doing does address the subject material, but maybe not the exact information that APCO requires in order to qualify. So I can't remember the exact standard off the top of my head, but if you look in the standard there's a part where it says that you have to show them, you have to train the trainee on the location of local public safety facilities such as hospitals, fire stations, and police precincts. Well, maybe your agency trains on hospitals but not on fire and police stations, or vice versa. Maybe they train on the fire and police stations but not on the hospitals. You probably are doing some sort of geographical training already. Maybe you are, I don't know. But if you are, you might find that you might need to change it up a little bit in order to meet the requirements of the standard. So you have a little work to do, or some work to do. You have a partial success on that one. Then there's a more complicated one, which is the third possibility. You are training on that particular element, but you don't have formal documentation of it that you're going to need to submit to APCO to prove that you do the training. It's not enough that you do the training when it comes to P33. You have to prove with documentation that you can submit to APCO that you're documenting the training in such a way that you can prove to APCO you're doing the training. So, for example, those geographical boundaries, maybe you just expect trainees to learn about that by listening on the job and sort of learning it as they go, which could be a thing. But if you're not documenting that in some way, if you don't have some sort of proof you can send to APCO that you're doing the training, then they're probably not going to approve you for P33 certification. And I find that this one is where certainly we had issues with this, and I'm guessing a lot of other agencies are having issues as well based on what I've been hearing, is that the documentation is where they run into the problems. They are doing a training, but it's not a formalized training, or they're doing a formalized training, but they're not documenting it in a sufficient way that would qualify for P33. We're going to talk quite a bit about that a little later on in the presentation so you can get an idea. And then, of course, there's the fourth possibility, which is that your agency doesn't train on some of the things. And I'm guessing for every agency, I don't think any agency waltzes into the P33 application and says, we already do all this, here's our documentation, see you later. I think changes are almost always needed for every agency. The question is how many out of those, again, I forget the number, maybe 160 of them. You know, if you have to, you know, expand your training to include 4 or 5 more things, or maybe even 10 or 20 more things that you don't have right now, that, you know, that might be a relatively small project. But of course, if you have, if you're sort of starting from scratch and you're missing 100 or 120 things, then it's going to be a, you know, could be a bit of a tough slog. So, and you take it piece by piece. And again, that's why I recommend that you go through that standard before you even formally open the application with APCO, before you go and pay your fee. Go through that standard and check it out, because if you have a lot of things to catch up on to get in alignment with the standard for P33, you don't want to be facing up against a ticking clock with the application fee in the mail and everything else to get your program going. It would be nicer if you had the latitude to get that done before, when there's less restrictions, before you go and you open your application, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so I would recommend that you go through the standard element by element. Next, and this is definitely a requirement of APCO, you have to complete an online training from APCO about how the ATPC program works. You're not allowed to open your agency's application unless at least one person at your agency has gone through the training. It's an online training. It can be taken by as many people as you like. Now, if you are going to be working on this alone at your agency, you might consider going to it alone, the training. If you're going to have a committee of people or a team, then you might think about having all the members of that team sit through the training, either individually or as a group. Even if you're doing it alone, or whether you have a committee, you might think about having your administration, your big bosses, sit with you on that training, or at least go through the training themselves, so that they know what your agency is getting into. It's free. It's self-paced. It's not a live class. It's kind of like this webinar. It's recorded. So you know, you just go through it. And Crystal does a great job of explaining. Some of the stuff that she explains is already in this presentation, but of course she talks about some other fine print that you need to know about when it comes to the ATPC application, you know, deadlines, milestones, rules and regulations, and things like that. But at least one person from your agency definitely has to go through that training in order to proceed with your application. And once you complete that training, they give you that completion certificate, and you have to upload it to APCO. And once you upload the certificate to APCO, then they will let you, at some point in the future, whenever you're ready, they will let you open formally your application and start the process and go through it. So you can do the training whenever you want, if I'm not mistaken. Check with APCO on that. But I think you can do the training whenever you want, and then you have an unlimited amount of time to do the application at any point thereafter. Again, check with APCO on that, but I believe that's the case. So that's going to be something that you're going to want to do. Next, I would recommend, and while I don't think this is strictly speaking required by the P33 committee, but I would recommend it, our agency would recommend it, download a copy of those, what they call the business rules. These are like the bylaws or the formal rules for the P33 committee and the P33 certification. This is where the dates and deadlines and things like that are formally spelled out in writing. It's like the rules and regulations, or SOPs, of the P33 program and committee. And again, this is something you definitely want to have on hand when you're going through your P33 application process. You should at least have an idea of what's in there, and you should have it on hand so that there's a question, oh, you know, how long do we have to do this part? Or, you know, when is the deadline, or whatever. You'll be able to look at it, whether electronically or on paper, but you'll be able to look at it and know without having to email APCO and wait for an answer and all kinds of things. And again, a lot of this is covered in Crystal's online training for the P33 committee, so you know, you do get a good taste of it in the training, but I would recommend you download a copy and review it and keep a copy so that you know what you're talking about when it comes to doing this certification. Next, after that, at this point, I would say once you've reviewed the standard, you've checked out your agency's training practices that already exist, you've thought about changes that need to be made, maybe you've implemented those changes, or you're in the process of implementing those changes, you reviewed the business rules, you did APCO's online training. At this point, when you feel that you're ready, this is the part where you would formally go in, open your agencies, you would go through the process with APCO of formally initiating or opening your online application process for the P33 program. This is when you have to pay your $500 up front from your agency. It's not refundable, so make sure your ducks are in a row, if at all possible, before you go through this step. And you're going to open your agency's online P33 application. So that gives you access to the website where you can start uploading things, and you start the process. You start the process of uploading your materials and documentation, or as APCO calls them, the proofs, into the online system. And again, we're going to go through that because there are some danger zones there which you might not be aware of. And when everything is in there and you're sure that everything is perfectly ready and it's all set up and everything, all your materials are in there and all your typing and everything, then you would do your final submit, your first final submit, and the materials get, they're shot off to APCO electronically for assignment to a review team, and they review it and they get back to you after their first review is done. So that final submit, that first final submit must occur by December 1st in order for you to make it. You don't have to get your certification by December 1st. You could be, being evaluated stage, but you don't have to have the certificate in your hands yet. But that first final submit has to be done by December 1st in order for you to make it to the next annual conference for presentation. So you submit your materials to APCO. If the materials are approved and everything is in order and the team says you're good to go, that's it. You get a nice letter from APCO that says, hey, congratulations, your agency has achieved the P33 certification, and they also send you information about, how to come to the conference and all that other sort of stuff. Sometimes it might happen that you submitted information, but they need some more information. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough what you submitted, and they need some more. They might need a little information. They might need a lot of information. Sometimes, depending on the situation, your agency just might get a short letter with 3 or 4 things that need to be tweaked. Other times it might be like a 30-page document with 400,000 things that need to be updated or whatever. So if they need more information, your agency can request a 90-day extension in order to get up to speed and make the second submission. You do have to formally request that from APCO, that 90-day extension. It's not automatic. So you have to formally request it by email, and that request has to be within the 30 days grace period. So if you submit your first final submit on February 1st, and let's say on February 15th you get the notice back from APCO, not enough information, we need more information. So that was on February 15th. You can apply for a 90-day extension. You have to make a formal request to APCO. The formal request to APCO would have to be by March 15th. You would have to get that to APCO by March 15th within the 30-day grace period. And then whatever date they granted to you, that's when the 90-day extension starts, and you have 90 days from that point to finish up and get your second submit in, your second final submit in, and then they would review it to see if you're good. There's no added fee if you have to do a second submission. The $500 includes that, the first submission and the second submission, and that's how it works. Hopefully after that second submission, you get your certification. You submitted whatever was missing and you get your certification. Of course, it's possible that, it does happen that agencies get denied certification. Let's talk about some situations. First of all, if you fail to request the 90-day extension, then yeah, you're probably going to get denied the certification and it's not going to happen. If you fail to submit whatever they were asking for, if you asked for the 90-day extension but you didn't submit anything, then yes, you're probably going to fail to get the certification. If this I think would be the more common one, where you did a second submit, but whatever you submitted wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough to meet the standard. It wasn't approved. Then yes, after that second submit, you sort of run out of strikes. Your certificate is denied. Your agency certificate is denied. And regardless of the situation, one of these scenarios, whether you failed to submit or it's not enough or whatever, if you miss the second time around, then you are denied certification. And if you want to get the P33 certification, you have to wait a minimum of 6 months, and you have to pay the $500 application fee again, and you get another two shots or 2 attempts to submit the information that they're asking for. So I hope that clears up what the process is like. Now, when it comes to looking at the standard is divided up into sections. They're numbered. The first, I think it's 6 sections or whatever, are general sections. Those apply to all agencies that are going to be going into the program. So regardless of whether you dispatch police, fire, EMS, or whatever, the general sections apply to you. You have to fill them out, and they have to be approved. The last few sections are divided up into police, fire, and EMS. So if your agency doesn't do a particular service, you don't have to submit for those sections. And you tell them when you do your application whether you do police, fire, EMS, whatever. So if you say, well, we only dispatch fire and EMS, we don't dispatch police, then they omit the police sections and you don't have to fill that part out, but you still have to do the fire and EMS sections or whatever your agency does, 1, 2, or 3. But you definitely have to do the general sections. Those are applicable to everybody. Now comes a part where we look at the standards document, and this is where I think some agencies are getting confused. We're going to talk about a couple different things in the standards document that confused us and might have confused you too, and I hope that it can help. First of all, When you look at the standards document, you're going to see that some of the elements say that the agency shall do X, Y, Z, and then there are other elements where it says the agency should do X, Y, Z. And that wording is a very important distinction when it comes to your P33 application. The shall items are required. You have to submit them. If you don't submit shall items, then you're not going to get approved, or you're probably not going to get approved. And those shall, most of them are shall items. The majority of the elements in the document are shall. Your agency shall do this, and your agency shall do that, or shall not, maybe, I don't know. But the shall indicates that it's required. There are some, I think the latest version, there's like 7 or 8 of them. I can't remember the exact number, but there's not many of them. But there are some that are should, and those are recommended. The agency should do this, and they should do that. And those are not, strictly speaking, required to get P33 certification. They're recommendations of APCO, and you may be eligible for certification even if you don't meet those standards. And you can see over here in 235, we have a shall. The agency shall maintain a complete training record for all telecommunicators, whereas in 239 it says the agency should. The agency should, when possible, subscribe to professional publications and so forth. So you want to make sure that you're submitting all your shalls, and as to the shoulds, you are not, technically speaking, required to submit them. You're not even, I think technically speaking, you're not required to explain why, but whether you're technically required or not, I would strongly recommend, based on our experience, I would strongly advise you that if you're going to omit a recommended item, an optional item, in that explanation field, I would strongly advise you to explain why you're not taking advantage of that recommended item. Maybe there's a good reason. Maybe the good reason is we don't have the money for it, or it's prohibited by our union contract, or whatever. Maybe there's a not so good reason for it. Maybe, our administration has just decided that they're not pursuing this, whatever. But I would not recommend leaving it blank. I would definitely not recommend leaving it blank. Type something in there that explains why you don't think the recommended item is going to work out for your agency, and don't just leave it blank and no explanation. Alternatively, if you are going to submit an optional item, and this one, in my opinion, very important, if you are going to submit an optional item, you've decided that you do want to do that optional item and your agency is doing it, please make sure that whatever you submit for the recommended item meets the requirements of the standard. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides. But sometimes people are like, well, it's not a big deal because it's recommended, so I'll throw it in there. And if they don't like it, they don't have to accept. No, that's not what's going to happen. If you submit an optional item and it's not meeting the standard or it's not acceptable, there is a chance that APCO is going to deny your application because of one of these recommended items. And how badly would you feel about that if it turned out your application got denied because one of the quote-unquote recommended or should items was the one or two that hung you up? That would just be so frustrating. So don't fall into that trap. If you're going to go in and submit on these optional items, if you decide to go that route, please take the time and effort to do it right, make sure it meets the requirements, make sure it meets the requirements of the standard, and that way you don't have to deal with the frustration of getting your application hung up because you missed a quote-unquote should item or recommended item, whatever we're calling it. Another thing which is a little, in our experience, confusing about the P33 application is it's not just the standard. The online application includes a lot of requirements in terms of documentation that are not covered in the standard. The standard talks about the subjects or skills that your dispatchers need to know. The agency shall train the dispatcher in geography. The agency shall train the dispatcher in, phonetic alphabet, whatever. But the standard does not address the format or nature of the documentation you have to submit. It says nothing about that. All that information about how what kind of documentation or minimum requirements documentation, that's all included in the online application, which is different. You have to look at the online application. That's not in the standard. How do you know what the online application looks like and what it requires? Well, the online application is available as a guest application. It's just a link on the APCO page. You don't have to log in or anything. You just go on through the guest application. And that way, even if you haven't applied or paid your $500 or anything like that, you can look at the guest application and you can check out the documentation requirements, and you can see what documentation requirements are needed before you decide that you're going to open your application. There's no charge, there's no limitation, there's no nothing. You can just go in there and click it. That's literally the real website. The website you see in the guest application and the website you see when you're doing your real application, literally the exact same website, or at least they look exactly the same. Really, the only difference between the two is that the guest application doesn't have the Save and Submit button. But other than that, it has all the fields, it has all the text, it has everything. It has everything. And if you go to the application website, again, I'll have the links at the end. You go to the application website, you can see it has the link for the guest application right there. You can go right in. It lets you, no login or anything. You just go in. I don't think there's a login. But whatever it is, it's free. You can just go in and check it out, and you can see all the wording that it needs to, that tells you what you need in order to submit for each element. And this is where some agencies are tripping up, in my estimation, in my experience, including ours. When you look at that application website, in addition to showing what's required in terms of the subject from the standard, like geography or phonetic alphabet, the application also includes the kind of proofs, the kinds of documentation that you have to submit to APCO in order to qualify. You're going to see when you go to, and I'll show a screenshot in a minute, but you're going to see that some of the elements in the application require training. You have to show proof of the training that you delivered to the dispatcher, how you trained them, or the method, or the nature of the training. And then also some of them require testing. You have to show how you tested or evaluated the employee, the trainee, to make sure that they retained the information, the training that you delivered to them. And I saw with our application, and I'm also hearing from people other in New York State as well, that they're getting hung up because they submit one or the other, but not both. Some elements require one, some elements require both, but if it requires one or both, you have to submit one or both, depending on what it requires. Let's take a look at something right from the application. This screenshot is directly from the online application. I went right on the website and took this screenshot. And if you look at the printed standard 5.3.1, the printed standard says the telecommunicator shall demonstrate the ability to operate agency radio systems. That's all the standard has. That's fine. You have to train your trainees in how to properly operate the radios that you use at your agency. That's fine. The second sentence is not in the standard. It's only in the online application. And it says, include related training materials and testing methodology used to demonstrate ability. Note those words, training and testing. For this particular element of the standard, you're going to have to submit probably at least two kinds of documents, or two documents, or two proofs. You're going to have to submit you have to submit proof of the training that you delivered, and then you're going to have to submit proof of a testing, some sort of evaluation or test of the employee to make sure that they're able to do the job or know the knowledge that's in question. In this case, operating agency radio systems. What kind of proofs are we talking about? Well, I will say that APCO is pretty flexible about what you can submit. For the training part, you might do maybe like PowerPoints, lesson plans, SOPs, maps, things like that. I've even heard, I haven't seen this, I don't know of anyone who's done this, but I've heard scuttlebutt from other reviewers or whatever that some agencies use audio or video files to be their training proof. I'm not sure what part of the standard would be addressed by that, but whatever. Every agency is a little different. APCO doesn't tell you how you have to do it. They just need to know that, for example, for 531, they need to know that you delivered the material to the trainee. And I would suggest when you submit that proof, make sure you pick a proof, whatever you choose to use, PowerPoint, lesson plan, whatever. I would recommend that you demonstrate in the material, first of all, the subject in question, in this case, using the agency's radio systems. And I would also recommend that you include in that documentation somewhere the method that you use to deliver the instructions to the trainee. So, you might say, here's the material, this is a lesson plan or whatever, PowerPoint, whatever you use, a guidance sheet, whatever. This is what we use, and we deliver it to the trainee by, in a classroom, or by showing them on the console, or playing a recording for them, or whatever it is that your agency does. But I would recommend that I would recommend that you include both the subject material, the content, and also the method that you use to deliver the instruction to the trainee, so that the reviewers don't have any questions. Because if all you submit is an SOP, right? Let's say you have an SOP about how to use the agency radio systems. That's going to be your proof. Well, that could be your subject material, but then the question that the reviewer might have is, okay, I see an SOP, but how are you delivering this to the trainee? Are you giving them a copy of the SOP and telling them to review it? Are you going through it with them? Are you making them answer questions? What are you doing to deliver that material to the trainee? And that could be as simple as just saying, we give the trainee a copy during orientation. That might be enough. Again, it depends on, I'm not going to give a ruling on exactly what your agency is doing, but that might be enough. But the point is, I would recommend that you include both the training subject material and also the method, at least a brief explanation of how you deliver that to the trainee. And that's the testing part of it, so you're going to have to submit that. And then that's the training part of it, so you're going to have to submit that. And then the testing or evaluation part of it, that's where you have to submit some sort of proof that you're evaluating or testing the trainee to make sure that they're retaining the knowledge that you spoke to them about, or that they're able to perform the skill in question. Again, the proofs seem to be pretty flexible on APCO's part. You could use tests, quizzes, worksheets. Again, audio, video. Maybe you record the trainee doing some sort of radio work, and then you review it, or you review it with the. Again, look, this could be sufficient. That's fine as long as you explain it. Course completion certificates, we'll talk about that one in a second. If you're using a CTO program like APCO's CTO program, frequently the testing is demonstrated by a DOR, a daily observation report, TTL, a trainee task list. If you're not using one of those more formal documents, you might be using a sign-off sheet, a check-off list, a signature sheet, whatever. It doesn't. I'm not saying APCO isn't saying that you need to use a particular format or not, as long as you can show that you tested the employee on the material in question at least a little bit, so that you can at least reasonably be assured that they know, the particular subject material. In this case, agency radio systems. Whether you give them a paper test or you use a DOR or something to validate their knowledge or their skill, then you need to include something on that. So, in many cases, for a lot of these elements that require both training and testing, like 531, which we just looked at a minute ago, you're going to have to include probably at least two forms of proof, two forms of documentation, one for the training and one for the testing. And if you omit one of those two on if you omit the testing one on a standard like that, on an element like that, they're probably going to deny you and say that, we got the training part, but what about the testing part? Or vice versa. We got the testing part, but what about the training part? You kind of have to have both. And that varies from element to element, so you got to read the standard and the application carefully. If you're going to use course completion certificates, and obviously the one that immediately pops to mind is APCO's PST course, Public Safety Telecommunicator. If you're in the process now, or if you already have P33 certification or anything like that, you know that the PST course doesn't include everything that's in the entire standard. That's not going to happen. It includes a fair number of items, but certainly not everything. If you're going to use the PST course as a proof for the training and testing, and you might do that. You might say, listen, our trainees go to the PST course. They're required to go to the PST course. And, in the PST course, they include information about, the phonetic alphabet or whatever. And that's also the test, because they have to take a test in the class, which, addresses these things. I think it's 100 questions. So if that's the case, you can use the PST course as your training and testing proof, or you might be able to. Of course, you have to make sure that the PST course addresses, or whatever course you're submitting on, whether it's a state course or something, whatever. You have to make sure that the course addresses the material in question. You also have to submit proof in terms of a student certificate for each one of those elements. So if you're going to use, out of the 160 elements or whatever in the standard, you're going to cover 10 of them or 20 of them or whatever with a course. You're going to have to attach a copy of the certificate to each element in the system every time, so that they can see that it covers that particular element. And I would say also, I would recommend that you submit a proof along with that certificate that explains a proof. It's a proof that says that you send all your trainees to that course, the PST course or whatever. If you just submit a certificate and say, well, we send people to the course, they might bounce it back and say, well, I see that you have a certificate for one student, but I need something that proves that you send all your trainees to that course. Maybe an SOP that says, all trainees will be sent to the PST course within 1 year of hire or whatever. They might request that. So I would suggest that you include that, because otherwise the reviewer might say, well, great, you had one person at your center that attended PST 20 years ago. That doesn't count, right? We need to see something that proves that everyone has to go. So keep that in mind when you're using course completion certificates to submit for a standard. Also keep in mind that the certificate date needs to be recent. It needs to be a recent certification. What do I mean by the word recent? I'm going to leave that one to APCO, and if you have questions about whether you have a recent enough certificate, the date-wise, then check with APCO for guidance on that. I do know that for some smaller PSAPs, you know, if you have a real small PSAP, 6 or 7 people, and you don't hire very often, you hire very infrequently, and, you know, maybe you go to do your P33 application, you say, well, you know, we haven't hired someone new for like 5 years, you know, and I don't have a recent certificate because no one's had to go in 5 years. That could be a situation. I would recommend you contact APCO for guidance. I'm not going to give you a specific ruling on that, but if you're not sure, contact APCO and ask for help. Whatever documentation you choose to submit, it's got to address the requirements of the item in question. So if you're in the fire portion of the standard, the fire dispatch portion, and it talks about fire radio, and you submit a test that you gave to the employee, and the test is about police radio, they're probably going to reject it. They're probably going to reject it and say, okay, that's great. I see you have training and testing for police radio. I need to see the part that addresses fire radio. That's not good enough, and so forth. It's got to specifically, the training and testing you submit for each element of the standard has to specifically address that one standard. You can't sort of mix and match. It's not good enough. The documentation needs to have a recent date. I think we just covered that one. I would strongly advise, I can't say whether this is officially required or not, you would have to ask the P33 committee, but I would strongly advise that all documentation, whether it's a certificate, whether it's a DOR, whether it's whatever documentation you submit as proof, I would strongly advise that they be real used forms, completed, filled out, not blank forms that you printed out of Microsoft Word and you just slapped into the document blank, or into the website blank. I would recommend that you take a written or filled out document that's been actually used. If you need to blank out any personal information, feel free. That's not a problem. But you don't want to be submitting blank forms. If you submit blank forms, your application might get denied, and you don't want to be, you won't be able to know. They'll just say, sorry, this documentation wasn't good enough, and you'll be like, well, was it because the form was blank, or was it because, you know, it didn't address the material in question? I don't know, maybe. I would advise you to only submit completed forms. Again, if you don't have a recently completed form, it's been too long, or maybe you have a particular form like used for disciplinary that rarely gets used, hopefully, and you never have to fill it out, or you've never had to fill it out because you haven't run into that situation where you had to do something, again, I would suggest that you contact APCO and ask them for help. Here's an example of a DOR that we submitted with our P33 application. This is our DOR. Actually, ours has been updated a little bit since this copy, but whatever. Here's a copy of a DOR that we submitted with our actual P33 application, and you can see it's a scan of a used up or a completed DOR, and we blanked out the trainee name because we have regulations internally that don't allow us to share, you know, personal information about employees, which is fine. So we blanked it out, and that's not a problem in my recommendation. I don't think that's going to be an issue with blanking out the information. I think they explicitly tell you that during Crystal's online training that you can blank out the information if you have to. Again, here's another example of another one. This is we issue an annual evaluation to our employees, including trainees, and they get an annual evaluation, and as part of the evaluation, there's a supplemental form that talks about goals for the trainee, and they also have the ability, under our union regulations, it's required, our collective bargaining agreement, we have to offer them the ability to give a written reply to the review in terms of feedback or debating it, contesting it, or anything like that. And we're required to keep in their personnel file. So as you can see here, because it's a personnel record, I mean, my signature is still there on the paper. By the way, don't be scanning my signature. Put away your phones. My signature is still on the paper, but everything about the trainee is blanked out because we didn't want to share that information. And again, your agency might have different regulatory requirements and things like that. So whatever your agency does, but blanking out information is not necessarily a barrier to getting the certification. So I hope that clears that up. As for submitting the documents themselves, I would strongly advise, it is certainly not required. It is certainly not required. It is not required by APCO. I would strongly advise you to buy one of the PDF software packages. The most common one is Adobe Acrobat, but of course there are others. There's Nitro. I actually prefer Nitro. That's the one I use, Nitro Pro. There is Foxic Pro. There are others, I'm sure, which are not on this slide. But by the way, Adobe Acrobat, if your municipality or whoever owns it already, then great. But it's really expensive. So Nitro and Foxic are much cheaper, and they do the same job. So I would advise Adobe Acrobat probably not, but whatever. Whatever works for you, doesn't really matter. PDF software makes your job, in my opinion, in my recommendation, quite a bit easier when it comes to doing the paperwork for the application. First of all, converting all your documents to PDF really helps reduce or almost eliminates, I can't guarantee 100%, but it 99.9% eliminates the rejection that happens when APCO reviewers can't open your document, whether it's because you use the different version of Microsoft Office, or you use a Mac instead of Windows, or you use LibreOffice or WordPerfect or whatever the heck else it is. By making them PDF, I don't want to say guaranteed, but you're almost guaranteed that they're going to be able to open your document and see it the same way that you sent it without any formatting issues or pieces missing or anything else like that. It's also nice if you have a scanner that can scan to PDF, and your PDF software can help you with that. If you can scan to PDF, that means you can take your handwritten documents and digitize them very easily and make them into a PDF, and you can make it much easier to send those documents to the recipient on the other end in a small size, as opposed to doing it like a JPEG or whatever, and that's like 12 megabytes, and the system rejects it because it's too big and whatever. It's much easier if you PDF it. The PDF software, and again, when I say PDF software, I'm talking about the full version of the PDF software, like Adobe Acrobat, not like the reader, the free reader one. That's obviously not going to do what you need. You would need to get the full paid version. But using those PDF software packages, it's much easier to highlight information or redact information. If you want to blank out, some personal information that you don't want the reviewer to see for whatever reason, it's much easier to do that using the tools in the software. You just draw your box and it covers it up, and it's all covered up so no one can see it. Also very nice, and this is what I would recommend, which we'll talk about in a minute. PDF software lets you combine multiple documents into one. So if you have standard 531, which we saw on the screen before, and you have to submit 5 different pieces of paper, or at least electronically, you have to submit 5 different documents for that one standard element. PDF software lets you mush it all together into one file that's just called file 531 documents or whatever, and that way you don't have to wrangle. It cuts down the number of files you have to wrangle and deal with. Instead of having 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever documents per standard and ending up with 1,000 pieces of different documentation, you can crush them all into one PDF for each particular standard element, and then you can just have not zero, but you have much fewer documents that you have to wrangle with and manage as part of the process, which makes life a lot easier. Next, regarding your documents, I would recommend when you have to type in for each element of the standard, you have to upload your files, your documentation, and then there's also a little field where you have to type a little explanation of what the documents are and how they apply. You have to do that for every one, and we'll look at a screenshot in a minute. I would strongly advise, I can't say if it's officially required, but I would strongly advise that you refer to the specific page number and maybe even line number on the page in the document that you're sending. Don't just send a 14-page document and say, oh, it's buried in there somewhere. This is our SOP manual, and just look over there. That's not acceptable in my experience. They want you to tell them exactly where to find it. And frankly, even if it's not officially required, I think it is, but even if it's not officially required, you don't want to run into a situation where the reviewer sees this 20-page document coming down the pipe, and they're just like, forget it. I'm not reading all this. This is crazy. I don't want it. You don't want to be in that situation. So make sure that you're referencing the exact page number. If you're using PDF software, even if you're not, if you're using Microsoft Word, but certainly if you're using PDF software, you can highlight it with color or put in a little balloon comment or whatever. And that way you can just say in your explanation, look at page 5 and see the highlighted area. That's what we did, and I think it makes the reviewer's life a lot easier to look exactly what you're talking about. And it hopefully greases the wheels to get your application done more efficiently on the review side and get it out the door so they can see exactly what you wanted. Now, of course, if you're going to submit a document that, it's the entire document, like if you're submitting a course completion certificate for PST and that's your proof, obviously the whole document, it's a one-page document, and the whole thing is a picture of the certificate. So I don't really think, highlighting is applicable in that situation, or page numbers or anything else like that, but you still have to provide an explanation. You could say attached is a PST certificate. The PST course addresses the training and also testing of the phonetic alphabet or whatever the subject is in question. You still have to get that little text explanation, but in terms of highlighting and talking about page numbers, I mean, it's a picture of a certificate or it's a photo that you're submitting, then highlighting is not really the thing probably. Use good judgment and just try to make it as easy as possible for the reviewer to see what you're talking about when it comes to both training and testing, so that you don't run into a problem with that. Here we see an actual screenshot of part of our application that we submitted. This is, I forget what number of the element of the standard this is, but this one is the one about progressive discipline. You have to train the trainee in how your disciplinary procedure is. And we do that by giving the trainee, during our onboarding process on day one, I think it's day two actually, but whatever, during our onboarding process, we give the trainee a copy of the SOP on paper, even though we keep it electronically in the room, but we give them a copy on paper so that they can review it at their leisure, and we tell them to review it, and we ask them if they have any questions. And we also, although we're not strictly speaking required to under our collective bargaining agreement, but to meet the standards, we inform the trainee that there is a union, that they are a member of that shop, and that they can contact their shop steward if they have any questions about the disciplinary procedure. And we type that in our explanation. The division distributes a copy of the agency's escalating discipline policy and procedure as part of the orientation process. The employee is also encouraged during orientation to contact their union representative to learn more about appeal and grievance options. Refer to the areas highlighted on page 1 through 5. And as you can see, we submitted, don't be snapshotting our SOPs, you mongrels. We submitted a copy of our PDF for that SOP, and using the PDF software, it's very easy to highlight those areas on pages 1 through 5 where it talks about our escalating disciplinary process, because the SOP is longer than 5 pages. It's another 5 pages, a total of 10 or 12 pages. But that way, we highlighted the area that the reviewer really needs to look at, and we also reference the page number, and thereby hopefully drawing their attention to the exact area where they're going to find the information they're looking for, and they can stamp it and say approved. And I would recommend, again, not necessarily required, I can't speak to that officially, but I would recommend that you go that route so that you can easily designate to the reviewers where they're supposed to be looking to find the information that they need and make it as early as possible for them. So that's regarding documentation. Include that training methodology. Include that testing or evaluation methodology if it's required by the standard. Again, read that application and read that standard carefully. Make sure that you're submitting the right documentation and that you're submitting it in the right preparation or the right format so that the reviewer can review it and check it out and get what they need out of it. Next item, I strongly advise, and again, I don't know if this is officially required by APCO, but I just can't recommend this enough. This is such an important one. Please, make sure that your bosses are on board with this process before you officially open the application. Look, downloading the standard doesn't cost any money. Looking at your agency's training program and comparing them to the standard, that probably doesn't cost any money. But if you're about to spend money or make changes or get embroiled in a process where you're going to have to do work and get the certification, please make sure that your agency bosses are aware of what's going on, that they know about the program at least on the surface. Maybe you want to have them attend that short training. Again, that training from Crystal Online is only, I think, about 45 minutes or an hour. I can't remember exactly, but it's not super long. And it's something that your boss can do on his or her own schedule. They could do it in the dead of night if they want to. So, I mean, look, you're going to have to spend the $500. And you might have to change your training program. Your training program might have to change or even get longer if you want to meet the P33 standard. And, of course, your boss is going to be asking why, most likely. They're going to say, hey, listen, why is the training now 4 months instead of 3 months or whatever? And why are we doing this? Because it's costing me my budget money to have a trainee for longer than before. Also, regarding the time that's actually involved in doing the application process, the time of working on the application, changing up your documentation, there's deadlines. It would be lousy if you were committed to work on other projects by your boss and you're like, oh, I have to have this application in within 30 days. You just assigned me 3 other things. So for all these reasons, please make sure your boss is on board, your bosses, whatever, are on board with the ATPC process and at least have an idea of what's going on if they aren't already. Another suggestion, find other agencies near you that have P33 certifications. Certainly if you're within New York or the surrounding Atlantic chapter, you're welcome to pick my brain. I'd be glad to help you. I know we picked Tompkins County in New York. If I recall correctly, is the only other agency in New York State that has P33 certification. I could be wrong on that, but it's close. We picked Tompkins County's brain because we had a couple questions when we were doing our application. Of course, anyone who wants to call me and listen to me yammer on this and that, agencies already are. They're calling and they're asking. So please reach out. And if you don't have anyone in your area or your state that has P33 certification, I mean, certainly you could go to another agency. Maybe you know somebody in an agency that's in a different state or something that you could pick their brain. The list of certified agencies for P33 is on the APCO website. You can just go down the list. So you can look and say, oh, hey, I know somebody over at, Raleigh-Wake 911. I'm going to call them and see if they can give me some piece of advice on how to fill out this particular element. Maybe if you have some local PSAPs that are all banded together, just like we do with ENP, where you have like a study group, maybe you want to sort of get together and do a group thing, have like a monthly conference call or something. I mean, that would be fantastic. But I'm not saying you have to go that far, but I would definitely recommend that you seek out someone in your same state or region that has P33 certification, or at least is in the process of P33 certification, but ideally they have it already, and you can sort of pick their brains and get information. Again, if it's within the same state as you, if the other agency has P33 certification and they're in the same state as you, then they might be able to tell you, hey, listen, the state requires training on XYZ, or like if you're in New Jersey and you have to take the New Jersey telecommunicator program when you get hired, they say, listen, we use the state program to cover, this part, and this part. We think they'll have knowledge of that because they're in the same state as you and they went through this process. That would be great as well. So seek out those agencies. I recommend you go through that guest application, not just to talk about the documentation stuff that I already mentioned, but also to get comfortable with the website a little bit. It can be a little quirky. Even the people at APCO think that it can be a little weird sometimes. So get comfortable with the way the website works. Again, the only difference between the website there for the most part and the real one is that there's no save button. But other than that, it's pretty much the same as the real application. So definitely go through the website and check it out. Start your documentation assembly process before you pay the application fee. Another strong recommendation. Download the standard, download the business rules, go through APCO's training, do all that stuff, and start getting your documentation together before you pay the application fee, because once you pay that fee and you open the application, the clock is ticking. If I recall correctly, and you should check with APCO for official clarification on this, but if I recall correctly, aside from the December 1st thing, you have a maximum of 12 months after you pay the fee in order to file your first final submit. So you don't want to, if you open your application and now the 12 months start, it sounds like a long time, but you're now up against the clock. And if you don't finish your documentation or whatever within the 12 months, and things happen like coronavirus and all kinds of things, you don't want to be up against the wall if at all possible. It would be much nicer if you could just have that stuff as prepared as much as possible before you actually push the button and start the application. So try to get your documentation assembled as much as possible and your ducks in a row before you actually go and open the application with APCO and pay the $500. It makes it easier for you. And frankly, it makes it easier for APCO also, in my recommendation, because then they don't have to chase you down for more materials. The process sort of goes faster once APCO gets involved. It's always easier to fix this stuff before you push the button. Another thing, keep the copies of your materials on your computer. Don't rely on the website. Yes, you do have to upload them to the website as part of the process, and that's going to happen at some point, but don't rely entirely on the website. Please keep a copy of the materials on your computer, and also don't trust your computer either. Keep a backup of the materials that are on your computer, because if your hard drive crashes, then you're screwed. I do hear sob stories from some of the other agencies that I've spoken to where they were in the middle of submitting and the website crashed or their computer crashed. That would really not be a good outcome. So please, backup. So important, so important. The way we tracked our documentation is we have a Microsoft Word document. Every page of the document in Microsoft Word is one element from the standard, 5.3.1, 5.3.2, whatever. The top of the page is basically copied right from the application, just like we saw on 5.3.1 before. The agency shall provide training on radio procedures, include the training and testing methodology used to achieve whatever it says. So that goes right up at the top of the page in Word. That's followed by our explanation, what we're going to type in the text field in the application. And right after that is a list of the files, the proofs, the PDFs or whatever, is a list of file names that we have in a folder on the computer server, and it includes we have a list of whatever files are going to be needed in order to submit as the proofs. And again, for each element of the standard, we mushed all the files together all the documents together into one file. So if there was one document for the training and one document for the testing, we mushed that together into one file. and we called it, for example, as we see on the screen here, 2.2.9. That was the standard. That was all the paperwork together for that standard. And if we needed to insert or remove something, we used the PDF software to insert or remove pages. But that way, it was much easier to just upload one file for each element of the standard, and just sort of, it's just much easier to keep track of the documentation as opposed to having like 2.2.9A, 2.2.9B, 2.2.9C. That was a nightmare. Mushing them all into one file was much, much easier. You can see also that when we did our first submit, we got rejected the first time. We needed more information. There was, I think it was maybe 6 or 7 items out of the 150 or whatever that we didn't have enough on. So we did have to do a second submit, full disclosure. We got it on our second submit. But we generated a second file for added information. We generated a second file. In this case, you could see 2.2.9.1. That particular thing, that particular element, we didn't have enough on. We had to submit additional information, so we generated a second file. So if you look in our application online, there were 2 files for that particular standard. One was the original, and one was the added information that we added on to make it complete. And then, so when it comes time, if you do it our way, and this is what we did, basically, once we had our documentation in a row, we were pretty sure we were ready to go. We had our Word document with a page for every element. We had our files. We were all whatever. Basically, at that point, filling out the application is a pretty quick and straightforward process. You basically just copy and paste from the Word document. You copy the text out of the Word document into the explanation for the item. Then you attach the file, the PDF file or whatever it is you're using that gets uploaded. And basically, you just plug and play. You plug all the items in. And of course, you're going to want to review it to make sure you didn't miss any by accident. One of the items we got rejected on was because we had accidentally copied and pasted the wrong paragraph. And we basically got a rejection from APCO on that part saying, this has nothing to do with anything. What are you talking about? So then we fixed it. We saw it. So copy and paste, in our case, from the Word document to the website. Once you press the final submit, and I strongly advise you to press save all the time. Press save all the time. The website's a little quirky, whatever. Press save all the time so you don't lose your work. Be careful. Don't hit that save and final submit button until you're 100% sure. Once you hit that final submit button, the game is over. It's like dropping your envelope in the mailbox with your tax return in it. You can't take it back. So don't hit that final submit button until you're very sure that everything is, all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. Also, by the way, you can't print the application once you've done a final submit. You can print it as much as you want during the application process, but once you hit final submit, the screen just changes from that point forward and says, thank you, we will review your application or whatever. So if you want to keep a copy of that application just as a copy, or you want to just, maybe in case there's an error later about whether you submitted the wrong thing for the wrong item, you want to print out that application before you hit the final submit button, because once you hit the final submit button, you can't print out your application anymore. And I would recommend that you do print out that application before you do your final submit. Take that snapshot, print it, and keep it later for recertification time. That printout plus your Word document plus your folder with all your proof files in it, your PDFs or whatever, that should make recertification a lot easier when it comes time for recertification. But it does happen that even if you do it, as best you can, you might get a reject saying that they need more information. And in that case, you have to formally request from APCO. You do it by email. Actually, you do it via a letter, but you can send a letter by email. You have to formally submit a letter to APCO. It can be electronically. Again, Casey Martins will give you guidance on that if it's needed. You do have to submit a letter to APCO. It's not automatic. You have to request a 90-day extension. Now, I was speaking with one of the agencies here in New York State about this. They had called me to ask a question about something, and they said, well, if you have a 30-day grace period to extend the application to make the request, and the request is good from the date that that you submit your request, should we wait until day 29 of the grace period? And that way, instead of getting 3 months, we'll squeeze 4 months out of it and give ourselves a maximum amount of time in order to do our second submission. Well, let me say this. Officially speaking, I can't give you a ruling on that. I would say that if you're going to do that, you're going to be very, very careful, because if you get to day 29 and all of a sudden you're like, crap, I forgot to submit that request to APCO, then you get denied, and that would not be good. Another way of thinking about that is, look, 3 months is maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's not a super long time, but if you're getting that more information needed or rejection letter from APCO, and you're looking at your materials, I mean, if you have that much stuff that needs to be changed that you can't change it within 3 months, if 3 months is not enough to catch up on the items they rejected you on, you know, maybe you should think about revamping your training program and starting the process over again in 6 months. I can't give you specific guidance in that regard, but I mean, out of I think it's 160 items or whatever the number of standard elements it is in the standard there. If you're getting a rejection letter for, like, you know, 70, 80 items or some other crazy percentage of the items you're getting rejected, I mean, maybe you need to rethink the process and think about how your training program is going, and maybe think about, again, it's not official, but I mean, that's what I would say if you called me and asked me that question. I'd probably say, you know, maybe you should think about going back to the drawing board and looking at your program and making sure that it's what you need it to be before you go on to submit. Maybe the time is to take a step back and think about, or you could try. I mean, I can't tell you no. I can't tell you no. But either way, don't wait too long. If you wait until that 30-day period is up and you don't submit the necessary request for the 90-day extension, then they're probably going to deny you and tell you that you're going to have to wait 6 months and pay anyway. So if you want to sort of play that game, I guess you can, but if you're going to, be careful. Be careful would be my suggestion. I hope that this webinar helped you learn a little bit more about how the ATPC certification application process works, and why the ATP certification is important, and what you need to do in order to successfully get the application and get the certification. The links that I spoke about earlier, you can download the standard online. I mean, you could just go to the APCO website, click on the standards menu, but basically apcointl.org/standards to download. The business rules are at www.apcointl.org/P33. You can get the business rules there. The actual application where you would go in to start uploading your stuff is at p33.apcointl.org, and the guest one is p33.apcointl.org/guest. You can go right in there and see the guest application and see everything else. And again, that's something I would strongly advise you to do before you go ahead and pay your $500 fee and open the application. Because in my estimation, it makes life a lot easier when you know what you're getting into and you're not up against the wall with the clock ticking. I hope you enjoyed this information about the path to P33, strategies for earning the Agency Training Program, or ATPC, certification. If there's any other questions, I see we don't have any other questions on the board. You're still welcome to email me, lcentel@44-control.net or lcentel@rockland911.org. It's the same thing. And I will do my best to help you out. Of course, I may end up referring you to APCO for official clarification, but I hope this information was helpful. And other than that, if there's no other questions, I will wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. Have a great one, and be safe.